Don't worry, Aku. After what you have done, I will personally make sure you pass your final mathematics exam. You don't have to worry about anything. But remember one thing, you must never tell anyone about what we have done. This will be our little secret, just between you and I. Aku sat at her desk, staring at the red marks on her mathematics test. The numbers blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She had studied for hours, sacrificed sleep, and even skipped meals just to prepare for this exam. Yet there it was, a big, bold F staring back at her. Her heart sank. She had promised her mother she would do better this term. Her mother, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to keep Aku in school, had high hopes for her only daughter. Aku couldn't bear to disappoint her again. The bell rang, jolting Aku from her thoughts. She quickly wiped her tears and stuffed the test into her bag. But as she stood to leave, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Mr. Nate, her math teacher, standing behind her. His smile was warm, but there was something in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Aku, can I have a word with you?" he asked, his voice smooth and reassuring. Aku nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She followed him to his desk, her heart pounding. Was he going to scold her for failing? Or worse, tell her she was hopeless? "Aku," he began, leaning casually against his desk. "I've noticed you've been struggling in my class. Mathematics can be difficult and tough, but I believe you have potential. You just need a little extra help." Aku looked at him, surprised. "Extra help?" "Yes," he said, his smile widening. "I offer private tutoring sessions after school. One-on-one attention can make all the difference. What do you say?" Aku hesitated. She had heard rumors about Mr. Nate, whispers among some girls about how he was too friendly with his students. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She needed to pass this class, and if he was willing to help her, who was she to refuse? "Okay," she said softly. "I'll come." The first few tutoring sessions were uneventful. Mr. Nate was patient and thorough, explaining concepts in a way that made sense to Aku. She began to feel more confident, even scoring a B on her next quiz. But as the weeks went by, things started to change. Mr. Nate began to sit closer to her, his hand occasionally brushing against hers as he pointed out errors in her work. He complimented her more often, not just on her math skills, but on her appearance. "You're such a bright girl, Aku," he would say, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "And so pretty too. You're going to go far in life." Aku felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to respond. She told herself he was just being nice, that she was reading too much into it. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. One afternoon, as they were wrapping up a session, Mr. Nate placed a hand on her shoulder. "Aku," he said, his tone serious. "I think you're ready for the next step." She looked at him, clearly confused. "The next step?" she asked. "Yes," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I can guarantee you a straight pass on your final exam, but it's going to require a little more commitment from you." "Sir, please, what exactly do you mean?" she asked, though she could guess what he was implying. She had heard the stories from some other girls. Stories of how Mr. Nate would offer them good grades in exchange for simple favors. She had always thought of those simple favors like she had heard to be harmless. However, she still had her doubts. But now, faced with the reality of failing and disappointing her mother, she wasn't so sure. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Nate's smile faded, replaced by a look of disappointment. "Aku, I'm trying to help you here, but if you're not willing to put in the effort, then I can't help you. It's your choice." Aku felt trapped. She needed to pass this class, but at what cost? She still did not know exactly what the simple favors meant. She thought of her mother, of all the sacrifices she had made to get her this far in her education. She couldn't let her down, not again. "Okay," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'll do it." The days that followed were a blur. Aku felt like she was living in a nightmare. going through the motions of her daily life while carrying the weight of her secret. She had come to learn the hard way what the simple favors really meant. She avoided her friends, afraid they would see the guilt in her eyes. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything except passing her final exam. But as the weeks went by, Aku began to notice changes in her body. She felt nauseous all the time, her clothes no longer fit, and she was constantly tired. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just stress. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She felt sick to her stomach, not just from the pregnancy, but from the shame and fear that came with it. What would her mother say? What would her friends think? And what about Mr. Nate? Would he even care? Aku knew she had to tell someone, but who could she trust? Her friends had encouraged her to give in to Mr. Nate's demands, and her mother would be devastated. She felt completely alone. One day, as Aku was leaving school, she was approached by Ms. Deborah, the new English teacher. Ms. Deborah had always been kind to Aku, often stopping to ask how she was doing. But this time, her expression was serious. "Aku, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Aku nodded, her heart racing. She followed Ms. Deborah to her classroom, where they sat down at a desk. "Aku," Ms. Deborah began, "I've noticed you've been different lately. You're not yourself. Is everything okay?" Aku hesitated. She wanted to tell Ms. Deborah everything, to unburden herself of the secret that was eating her alive. But she was afraid of what would happen if she spoke up. "Aku," Ms. Deborah said, her voice softening, "you can trust me. Whatever it is, I'm here to help you." Tears welled up in Aku's eyes as the words spilled out. She told Ms. Deborah everything about the tutoring sessions, the promises, the threats, the pregnancy. Ms. Deborah listened in silence, her expression growing darker with each word. When Aku finished, Ms. Deborah placed a hand on her shoulder. "Aku, you're not alone. We're going to get through this together. But we need to act quickly. Nate needs to be stopped before he hurts anyone else." Ms. Deborah wasted no time. She went straight to the principal, demanding that action be taken against Mr. Nate. But the principal, a man more concerned with the school's reputation than the well-being of its students, was hesitant. "This is a serious accusation," he said, his tone dismissive. "Do you have any proof?" Ms. Deborah's eyes narrowed. "Aku is proof, and I'm sure there are others who are too afraid to come forward. If you don't do something, I will." The principal sighed, clearly annoyed. "Fine, I'll look into it. But if this turns out to be nothing, there will be consequences." Ms. Deborah left the office, her mind racing. She knew the principal wouldn't do anything unless forced. She needed to take matters into her own hands. The next day, during the school assembly, Ms. Deborah took the stage. The students, teachers, and even the principal looked up in surprise as she began to speak. "Students, faculty, I have something important to say," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "There is a predator among us, a man who has been using his position of power to exploit and abuse the very students he is supposed to protect. His name is Mr. Nate." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Mr. Nate, who was sitting in the front row, stood up, his face red with anger. "This is outrageous. How dare you make such accusations?" Ms. Deborah ignored him, continuing to speak. "I have spoken to one of his victims, a brave young woman who has suffered in silence for too long. Aku, will you please come forward?" Aku, who had been sitting in the back of the room, stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk to the front of the stage. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed on Ms. Deborah, drawing strength from her presence. "Aku," Ms. Deborah said gently, "tell them what happened." Aku took a deep breath and began to speak. She told the entire school about the tutoring sessions, the promises, the threats, and the pregnancy. As she spoke, she could see the shock and horror on the faces of her classmates and teachers. Some of the girls in the audience began to cry, while others looked at Mr. Nate with anger and disgust. When Aku finished, the room was silent. Mr. Nate, realizing he had been exposed, tried to make a run for the door, but he was quickly stopped by a group of male teachers who had been listening in the back. The principal, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally took action. "Mr. Nate, you are hereby suspended pending a full investigation, and I assure you, this matter will be taken very seriously." In the weeks that followed, the school was in turmoil. Mr. Nate was arrested and charged with multiple counts of sexual misconduct. More girls came forward with their own stories, and the community was forced to reckon with the darkness that had been lurking in their midst. Aku, though still dealing with the emotional and physical toll of her ordeal, found strength in the support of her friends, her mother, and Ms. Deborah. She decided to keep the baby, vowing to give her child a better life than the one she had known. At the graduation ceremony, Aku walked across the stage to receive her diploma, her baby in her arms. The audience erupted into applause, not just for her academic achievement, but for her courage and resilience. As she looked out at the crowd, Aku felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had faced her darkest fears and come out stronger on the other side. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew she wasn't alone. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Speak up and break the silence. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like this. God richly bless you. Catch you in the next video.